Well, it's day 16 and time to unlock our robustness badge by learning all about error handling with streams and remote services. It's going to be fantastic. Well, let's dive into error handling. Of course, when we're dealing with remote services, errors are just a fact of life, but currently we don't cater for them at all in our calls to our gets and posts and puts. So let's set that straight. Now, the first thing you need to know is that with observables, you can add a catch block to the chain. Actually, the first thing we need to do is actually fix this import, because this was a little generous when we imported it, and it's going to lead to some clashes in our catch blocks. So I'm just going to scope down what I import. Now, in our catch block, we can put an error block here and a fat arrow and start doing stuff and coding away. But we've got obviously lots of HTTP calls that we're going to want to be catching errors from. So the best practice really for this sort of stuff, I've seen guys implement an actual, maybe like a handle error or something like that sort of function that we're just going to use generically whenever we need to do this kind of stuff. So let's just set that up. Private handle error, and it's going to take an error. Maybe we'll call it error. And in here, we'll just do it as a minimum console.log the error. So this is the forensic level, okay? This is the stuff in services where you want to catch the error, log it out for your own kind of forensics later on to see what went wrong. We'll handle the user side of this in a sec. Okay, so you'll see we've still got an error though. It's not happy with this. That's because this is a flowing chain of observables. So we need to keep that chain flowing so it gets all the way back to our clients, which means we need to return an actual observable stream with an error on it. So we're going to do that by .throw, and then we're going to just rethrow the same error, and you'll see this is now happy. So what we've got now is we've got a flow happening inside this response. Any kind of error happens through this response, then this catch block will fire. Our observable will throw all the way back to the client. Well, that's all well and good, but we need to obviously do some client-side code to catch it. So at the moment we subscribe and we get this stuff. But how do we do errors? Well, turns out subscribe takes a second argument as well, which is going to be the error. So we'll just take our error in here and we'll pass it into a block of code that we can enter. Now, there's a few things we could do here. We could do a console log. Remember, we're now really in user land. We're inside the component, so this is something we want to display to the error. So rather than console log, because that's pretty much useless, let's actually display it to the client. So maybe we'll create a new variable called maybe error text, and that's going to hold our error text. And inside here, we might do something like, we're going to go error text equals, oh no, an internal error. In fact, if we want to go nuts, and let's go nuts, why don't we use our interpolation stuff, which is our backtick operator, so we can actually interpolate some strings in the middle of this, so we can actually, the error, underlying error was ER. And then we can interpolate that, and that's kind of cute because we've got the actual error as well. Cool, so we've assigned that to our error text. We now need some way of displaying that error text in the feed component itself. So perhaps we better add a block of code to do that. Now, I've prepared one earlier that I've just grabbed straight out of Semantic UI, which is a standard error block, which uses this UI negative message, which gives a nice little red kind of vibe. And I'm going to just ngIf this on error text. So this is using that sort of truthy falsy kind of JavaScript deal. So if there's any value for error text, this block will fire and it will be output into our error. So let's first of all make sure we haven't busted anything. Okay, reloading, looking good so far. What we need to do now is actually generate an error. So let's just go into our feed service. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons that errors could fire here. For instance, if you're trying to deserialize this JSON and you realize that the response is empty because the status code has been returned as 404 or whatever, then this will throw. But let's just simulate this ourselves for now and just go throw a really nasty internal error. Okay, so I'm just going to physically throw that. And we should see that when this now renders, it will go off to asynchronously fetch that feed. It'll cause an error, and oh no, we've experienced an internal error. The underlying error was a really nasty internal error. So that's basically the process of using a catch clause on our stream and then catching it, our observable stream, and catching it at the other end. So that's pretty great for that level. We should probably now retrofit this to our put as well. So put is probably a really good example of this, because what we did before was we said, like, if the status is 204, that means this put has worked and we've successfully updated. Really, if the status is anything else, we need an else block that's going to throw an error. So let's just throw error fetching tweet, and we'll use our interpolation as well because we're just feeling it. And we received status code, and we might as well put that in as well, eh? Which was resp dot status. Yeah, status, that's our guy. Okay, so we've got a nice little error message firing. We haven't yet got a catch block, but we can just use the same catch block we've done here. Boom. And we can add that onto here. So we now are throwing this error if we don't get the 204 we're expecting, and this is going to generate an error on this particular observable that we need to catch again when we update things on the client side. So let's have a look in here. Well, we have got this call here where we post a new tweet and then we subscribe. So let's just use the similar kind of operation here where we grab an error block and we'll paste that in here. So we have, oh no, we've experienced an internal error. Really, we should reuse this probably. But for now, that'll do the job. So we now have our errors happily propagating through to our feed, and we're catching them and logging them and doing all the good things. Possibly now we want to also handle the scenario where when we start this process, we get this kind of loading. I don't know if you see it quick enough, but you see it initially a loading screen here that disappears. Let's have a look. If we go back into our mock database, let's just slow things down on our HTTP module to say, instead of resolving in 100 milliseconds, let's say that's 3 seconds to resolve. And now let's refresh that. And you'll see that when for the first few seconds, there's not any tweets here. And then after 3 seconds, it resolves and it populates. Well, that looks pretty just horrible. So let's fix that up, and it'll also teach you a new aspect of observables that we haven't talked about yet. Okay, so we said that when we subscribe to this, we can get our success case here and our error case here. There's actually a third case as well, and that's when things complete. Now, it doesn't take any arguments, I don't think. Let's have a look. Nope, it doesn't. But you can fire a block of text. If you're in a Java land, this would typically be like a finally block, right? So this is going to fire once this completes either way. And in this case, why don't we say we'll have a flag, for instance, loaded equals false. And once this is finished, we'll set loaded to true. Loaded equals, this dot loaded equals true. Okay, so now we handle the case whether success or fail will pass through and we actually finished loading. Once that's done, well, I'll need to possibly wrap our existing markup in just an if test for that loaded state. And let's just maybe wrap this whole block here of all of our comments and everything in an if block div. And then in the scenario where we in fact have not yet loaded, then we'll just put in a block here that says we're loading. Okay, so once we save that, this will load. We'll go into a loading state. And then as the tweets come back, we're loading, 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 and then they arrive and then they render. So today that pretty much covers everything we wanted to talk about with observables. We wanted to talk about how you could chain them through and implement a catch block as we did in our service, which we could generically do as a function. And then we talked about on the client side of things, when you get that stream back, that there were two different new arguments that we hadn't talked about. So the first was the success case, the second was the error case, and the third was the complete case, and how we can make use of that for handling our loaded scenarios. So that's it for today. For the next couple of days, we're going to dig deep into form validation and revisit all of that stuff because there's a few different approaches to that we haven't looked at yet. So I can't wait to get into that. Next week, it's going to be great.